your name's not on the list." Those were the first words my father said to me as I stood in front of the boathouse venue, cradling a carefully wrapped gift, and a heart pounding so loud it drowned out the Lake Michigan waves behind me. He didn't greet me. He didn't even blink. He just stood there in his crisp navy suit, hand resting on a clipboard like some bouncer at a nightclub. Behind him, Sophie lingered in the doorway, her soft curls styled just like Mom's, a pale pink dress hugging her like approval. She tilted her head, eyes gleaming with the kind of satisfaction only cruelty can deliver in disguise. Daniel was beside her, tall, unsure, shifting his weight awkwardly from one foot to the other. He looked anywhere but at me. I managed to keep my voice from shaking. "I spoke to Mom last week. She said I should come." Dad didn't budge. "That, maybe, but your name isn't on the list, Elena." "Eleanor." Funny how it sounded like a stranger's name when he said it that way. My family has never protected me. But today, they don't even need my existence. Growing up as the middle child in the Grant family in Evanston, Illinois, felt like living between parentheses necessary, but easy to forget. Sophie was the golden light, the achiever. Noah, the youngest, was the laughter, the tenderness, the baby everyone adored. I was the silence in between. In the family photos that lined our old hallway, Sophie beamed with trophies and pageant sashes, Noah grinning in someone's arms, always front and centre. Me, I was the blur near the corner, half cut or holding someone else's coat. But Mum used to see me. When I was 7 and didn't get invited to Madison Carter's birthday party, I came home sobbing, convinced I was invisible. Dad said flatly, "Not everyone gets invited to everything." But Mum sat with me on the kitchen floor. We made paper crowns and threw a party for 2. She whispered as she tied a pink ribbon in my hair, "You're special in ways they can't see. Don't forget that baby." I didn't. When I won 3rd place in the 7th grade science fair, Mum framed the certificate and hung it on the wall next to Sophie's wall of valedictorian medals. "It's not about being the best," she said. "It's about doing your best." Dad took it down 3 days later, muttering that it cluttered the frame layout. Mum moved it into her nightstand drawer. On my 16th birthday, after all my friends ditched me for Lindsay Rucker's pool party, Mum drove me 2 hours into Chicago to see Les Miserables. We dressed up. She let me order wine. We laughed like conspirators. "Sometimes," she said as we stood under the marquee, "you create your own spotlight." That night, I believed her. But something shifted when I left for Boston. I was the only one who moved away. Sophie stayed local and joined Dad at the family insurance firm. Noah dabbled in bartending photography and then bartending again. Meanwhile, I clawed my way up in the tech world until I became director of strategy at Solvik Systems, managing budgets larger than Dad's entire agency revenue. I flew home when I could call weekly and curated thoughtful gifts every holiday, but distance became an accusation rather than just geography. Dad would ask, "So still working at that computer place?" Mum's updates became shallow, as if she were reading a weather report of my life instead of living in it. The last time we were all in a room was Thanksgiving 3 years ago. Sophie, tipsy on Merlot, cornered me in the kitchen. "You think you're better than us, don't you, with your city job and your tailored coats?" "That's not true," I said, voice low. "You don't get it. I'm the one holding things together here while you drop in with gifts like that make you part of this family." I wanted to scream, but instead I whispered, "I built my life myself. I didn't inherit it." She called me a narcissist. I left the next morning. Since then, the phone calls dwindled. Texts became transactional. When I heard about Mum's 60th birthday, it was on Facebook, Sophie's event page, not Mum's. A celebration of Patricia Grant, 60 years of grace. I wasn't tagged, and now here I was. standing outside that party in my carefully chosen navy dress, holding a vintage emerald brooch I'd hunted down for weeks. I'd flown in from Boston, rescheduled an entire executive meeting, and rehearsed my lines like I was prepping for a TED Talk. And Richard Grant, the man who taught me to ride a bike, the one who handed me a ring box at graduation and said, "Don't wait for someone to give you diamonds," had reduced me to a name not on a list. "Please," I said quietly, "can you just let Mum know I'm here?" He didn't move. Sophie crossed her arms, her lips twitching like she enjoyed watching me squirm. Daniel's eyes flickered. He opened his mouth, then closed it. If I cry here, they win. If I beg, I disappear again. I didn't fly 900 miles to shrink. I steadied myself. "Then, please give this to her," I said, handing the gift to Dad. "Tell her I hope she has a beautiful birthday." He hesitated, then took it. I nodded once, turned, walked, back, straight. Each step felt like a funeral march for a family that never quite had space for all of me. The door didn't close behind me. It never opened. I left Illinois with 2 suitcases, a full scholarship to MIT, and a hunger no one back home seemed to recognize. Boston wasn't just a place. It was a promise. A clean slate. A room I could finally fill with my voice. My first winter in Cambridge was brutal. The snow didn't just fall, it scolded. But I walked to class every day like I belonged. 4 years later, I walked across a stage and into a world where I built everything myself. My apartment, my job, my voice. By 30, I was a rising name in tech strategy. Solvix gave me a team, a budget, and a seat in boardrooms I had only ever imagined. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was simply living what I'd dreamed. Meanwhile, back in Evanston, Sophie stayed. She took Dad's offer to join the agency. She managed policies and client calls, took Mom to doctor's appointments, brought banana bread to neighbours, wore pearls to church. "She's such a good girl," Aunt Marianne told me on one visit. "She's always there for your parents," said Uncle Lou. Their praise tasted like judgment. I wasn't absent. I just chose differently, and different in our family often meant wrong. Thanksgiving, 3 years ago, was supposed to be a peace offering. I'd flown in with wine from Napa New Boots and a script rehearsed for light conversation. But peace never arrived. It started with Sophie pouring herself a 3rd glass of wine. "Must be nice," she said across the table, "living your life dropping by when it suits you." I looked up fork midair. "Excuse me? We handle everything while you play executive? Mum's blood pressure, Dad's stress, Noah's debts? You wouldn't know, you're not here." Mum tried to interject. "Girls." But Sophie kept going. "You send your little gifts, your emails with flight delays. But when do you ever stay? When do you ever help?" I put my fork down. "You think I don't want to help? You think I don't carry guilt every time I miss a birthday or an emergency?" Sophie crossed her arms. "You chose your job over this family, over us." "No, I chose not to disappear. I stood up, my heart beating like a war drum. I didn't leave because I didn't care. I left because staying meant erasing myself. I needed air, Sophie. I needed to know who I was outside of this house." Dad cleared his throat. "That's enough. We're having dinner." "No," Sophie said suddenly, calm. "She wants to be separate. Let her eat somewhere else." Noah looked at his plate. Mum looked pained. No one else spoke. I didn't abandon my family. I just refused to abandon myself. I picked up my coat, walked out. No one followed. That was the last time I saw any of them before the party. In the months that followed, silence became our common language. Calls from Mum turned into texts. Then, nothing. The weekly catch-ups about her book club or Dad's cholesterol disappeared into a void. I sent a Christmas basket with monogrammed mugs. No reply. When I emailed to say I'd be in Chicago for a conference and would love to stop by, no response. Every absence from them echoed louder than words. And yet I clung to the idea that time would fix things, that we were just giving each other space. But space, unspoken and unmanaged, becomes a canyon, the kind you fall into, not walk across. I remember lying in bed one night, the city noise outside muffled by the double-paned glass of my Back Bay apartment. I scrolled through my old texts with Mom, rereading her last message. Hope the Singapore project goes well. Love, Mom. It was dated almost 10 months earlier. Sophie had won. The narrative that I had left them took root. Without my voice, it became the only story told. And so, when I saw the Facebook post about Mum's 60th with the guest list that read like a high school reunion, and my name nowhere in sight, I felt something give way inside. Not just sadness, resignation. They've already written the ending, and I wasn't even given a line. But that wasn't the ending. Not yet. Because part of me, however, Bruce still wanted to be heard, still believed the girl who once wore paper crowns in a kitchen kingdom with her mother might be worth more than a list, might be worth coming home for. It started on a Tuesday night. I was still at the office nursing the dregs of a cold brew and finishing budget projections for Q2. My co-workers had long since gone. The janitor had vacuumed around my heels, and yet there I sat, lit only by the pale glow of my monitor. When I opened Facebook, I wasn't searching for pain, just distraction. What I found instead was a banner, Patricia Williams turned 60, a celebration of love. Sophie had created the event page. Photos glittered like confetti balloons, candles, floral arrangements, and faces I hadn't seen in years. Great-aunt Caroline, cousin Josh, even my godmother flew in from Arizona. Everyone, it seemed, had gathered. Everyone except me. I clicked on the guest list. My name wasn't there, not even marked as not going. Just gone. Not a mistake, not a forgetful oversight, a choice. I stared at the screen, breath caught in my chest like a hiccup that wouldn't pass. The longer I looked, the clearer it became someone had decided I didn't belong. I didn't cry. Not then. There wasn't room. Only silence. The kind that hums in your teeth when truth collides with denial. I picked up the phone, dialed the only number that mattered. Eleanor. Mum's voice was cautious, like she already knew why I was calling. I saw the post, the party, your birthday. A pause. Oh, that. I didn't get an invitation. She exhaled. Sophie said you were busy. The Singapore expansion. That's next month, Mum. I never said I couldn't come. In fact, I told you I'd make time. Her voice shrank. Well, of course you should come. We'd love to see you. She didn't know, at least not all of it. Sophie didn't just miscommunicate. She erased me. Tell me what time to be there, I said. I'll be flying on Friday. After we hung up, I stared at my reflection in the office window. My face, half lit by the screen glow, looked foreign. Older, determined. I won't show up wounded. I'll show up ready. The next morning I cancelled meetings. Booked a first-class ticket I couldn't quite afford. Then I made a list. It wasn't just a birthday trip, it was a campaign. I started with the gift, an antique emerald brooch, one that mirrored a piece my mother had lost years ago. I found it in a boutique near Beacon Hill, wrapped it in soft velvet, and paired it with a spa package she'd once mentioned longingly. Then came the outfit. Navy blue dress, elegant, understated, heels just high enough. Makeup is soft but defined. Jewelry was minimal. Everything is chosen to whisper, I am doing well. I remember you. I still care. But what took the most preparation was my voice. I spent hours in front of the mirror that week. Happy birthday, Mum, I practiced. Smile, warm, not brittle. It means so much to be here. Pause. Eye contact. No, Sophie, I'm not here to argue. I just want to celebrate. No defensiveness. No justifying, just truth. I even rehearsed the worst case scenario. Dad, if you ask me to leave, at least take the gift. It's not about me. It's about her. Each line became a shield. Not to attack, but to stand firm. To protect myself. That night, I lay awake thinking about the layers of distance that had grown over the years. How did we go from paper party hats and midnight musicals to silent birthdays and blocked doors? Was it really just geography, or the stories we chose to believe about one another? Maybe Sophie needed to be the good daughter so badly, there wasn't room for me at all. On Thursday night, suitcase packed, I poured myself a glass of wine and stared at the plane ticket confirmation. $2,100 for a 48-hour trip back into the eye of a storm. Some things you do not do because they're easy, but because you need to know you tried. Before bed, I wrote a note in my journal. No expectations, just presence. No bitterness, just clarity. I fell asleep, picturing my mother in that brooch, laughing the way she used to in the kitchen, powdered sugar on her cheek. I woke up knowing this wasn't just about a party. It was about reclaiming my place in the story. On the way to the airport, I received a text from Sophie. Heard you're coming, just don't make this weekend about you. I stared at it in the Uber thumb hovering. I typed, looking forward to celebrating Mum, and hit send. Not everything deserves a reaction. Some things deserve silence loud enough to echo. 3 hours on the flight gave me time to practice my breathing exercises, polish my rehearsed lines, and imagine every possible outcome. By the time we landed, I wasn't calm, but I was ready. The morning was brisk. A low wind skimmed across Lake Michigan, ruffling the hem of my navy dress. The venue, a restored boathouse, gleamed in the sunlight, trimmed in spring flowers and laughter. I walked slowly from the parking lot, each step deliberate. In my arms, the gift sat, perfectly wrapped. The emerald brooch, the spa voucher, and a handwritten note folded neatly inside. This isn't for them. This is for her. The first face I recognized was Uncle Tim's. He gave me a double take and a hesitant smile. Eleanor. Hi, it's been a while. He nodded, adjusting his tie. Didn't know you were coming. Neither did they, I murmured. I approached the door, shoulders back. My father stood there like a gatekeeper, Richard in his pressed blazer and military posture clipboard in hand. When he saw me, he didn't smile. You're not on the list, he said. I spoke to Mom. She said, the list is final. His voice cut like glass. I am your daughter, not a stranger at a gala. Behind him, Sophie appeared, pink dress pearls. Her expression was neutral, but her eyes flickered with triumph. Daniel trailed behind her eyes, unsure. He didn't meet mine. What's going on? She asked too sweetly. Eleanor wasn't invited, Dad answered. Oh, that's awkward. I thought we settled this. No one settled anything, I said. You know how Mom hates conflict. Sophie shrugged. I looked past them, trying to spot my mother. She's busy with her guests, Dad said sharply. She doesn't need drama today. The word drama hit me like a slap. You planned this. You orchestrated my absence, and now you paint my presence as disruption. I turned to Daniel. Daniel, do you think I shouldn't be here either? He opened his mouth, then closed it. Eyes dropped to the floor. I think, maybe, it's not the best time. My heart clenched. Even you, even now. The moment stretched. Every eye near the door was watching. An aunt cleared her throat. Someone whispered, Is that Eleanor? A wave of shame and disbelief washed over me. For a second, I imagined screaming, causing a scene, demanding to see my mother. But then, something shifted. calm, clarity. "Give this to Mom," I said, holding out the gift. "It's for her, not for me." Dad hesitated, then took the package. "Tell her. I wish her the happiest birthday." I made sure to look him in the eye. I made sure I didn't tremble. "You may guard the door, but I carry the truth." Without waiting, I turned, walked, 1 step, 2. Each one is heavier than the last. Behind me, the party continued. Laughter rose like smoke. Sophie laughed. Dad said something low. Daniel didn't speak. When I reached the car, I gripped the steering wheel like a lifeline. I didn't cry. I breathed. In, out, 2, 3, 4. I had made the journey. I had tried. I had touched the wound. But I hadn't let it own me. They can keep their curated story. I won't play the villain in it any longer. Outside, the wind rippled the lake like a memory. Inside, my pulse slowed. I would drive away. I would fly back. I would build again. But I would not forget this moment. I had shown up. Not for approval, but for truth. And that I told myself is the only kind of arrival that matters. I sat in the car for several minutes. My hands still shook slightly, but my spine had straightened. The little girl who once cried over being cropped out of photos wasn't here anymore. The woman in this car had power even if her family refused to see it. A couple emerged from the venue, throwing glances my way. I turned the ignition, letting the hum of the engine drown out their whispers. Then came a knock on the window. Startled, I turned. Daniel. He motioned for me to lower the window. I hesitated, but eventually rolled it down halfway. "Hey," he said softly. I didn't answer. "That was hard to watch." "Not as hard as it was to live," I replied. He looked away. "I didn't agree with what they did." "But you said nothing." "I know, I froze. I'm sorry. Apologies are easy. Courage is rare." "Tell Mum I left something for her," I said. Daniel nodded and stepped back. As I rolled the window up, I whispered the words I never got to say inside. "Happy birthday, Mum. I'm still your daughter, even if no one here wants to see me." The sun hadn't moved much by the time the knock came. I nearly jumped. My hands were still on the wheel knuckles white. Daniel stood outside his silhouette, outlined against the glittering lake. This time his eyes were clearer, like someone who had made a choice. I rolled the window down. "Can I sit?" he asked, nodding to the passenger seat. I hesitated, then hit the unlock button. He slid in slowly, careful not to disturb the fragile air between us. "You probably think I'm a coward," he began. "I think you didn't say anything when it mattered," I replied. He nodded. "That's fair." A beat of silence. The engine idled. The lake murmured. "But there's something you should know," he continued. "Something I should have told you earlier." He reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a small ID badge. Vertex Technologies. My company. My logo. I work in the Boston office. Software engineering. Joined 8 months ago. My heart skipped. I stared at the badge, then at him. "You work for me?" "Not directly, but yes, you're basically my boss." I leaned back stunned. "Does Sophie know?" "She knows I work for Vertex, but I never told her how close we actually were. Figured it might get complicated." A humorless laugh escaped me. "That's one word for it." Daniel looked out the windshield. "I saw how they treated you, and I should have said something sooner, especially because I've admired you for a long time." I blinked. "You what?" "At work, everyone knows your name. The way you lead, how you navigate chaos without ever raising your voice. I looked up to you long before I realized you were Sophie's sister." The irony. I was a ghost to my family and a legend to strangers. He took a breath. "But it's not just that. Last night at the rehearsal dinner, I overheard something. Your dad and Sophie were talking about what they'd do if you showed up. My breath caught. What do you mean? They planned it. Your mum wasn't there. Your dad said he'd handle it. Sophie laughed, said you wouldn't come anyway, and if you did, they'd make it awkward enough that you'd leave. I turned away, hot tears rising. She told my mother I refused the invitation. Yes. When your mum asked this morning if you were coming, Sophie said you had sent regrets weeks ago. The betrayal sliced clean. She didn't just want me gone. She needed me vilified. She needed them to hate me enough that my absence became justified. I gripped the steering wheel again, this time not in fear, but fury. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Daniel looked down. Because I saw how wrong it was, and I couldn't stay silent anymore. I nodded slowly. My thoughts scrambled, but one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let them write the story of me ever again. For years I let guilt bind my tongue. But the silence didn't protect me. It only built the gallows they used to hang my name. I reached for my purse and reapplied my lipstick with shaking hands. You going back in? Daniel asked, voice tight with both concern and awe. Yes, I have something to say. Do you want me to come with you? I looked at him. Really looked. This man who had stood quietly on the sidelines now offered me the kind of loyalty my own blood denied. Yes, I said softly. Not as a backup, just as someone who sees me. He smiled faintly. That I can do. Together, we stepped out of the car. The wind caught my hair as we walked toward the venue again, not like intruders this time, but like truth returning to the place it had been exiled. I took a deep breath, not for courage, for clarity. This isn't about revenge, it's about reclamation. They stole my voice in whispers. I'll take it back out loud. As we neared the door, Daniel reached out and gently touched my arm. They won't expect this. That's the point. Inside, the celebration buzzed. Music, laughter, toasts. But I wasn't coming for applause. I was coming for the truth. You know, Daniel said, voice quiet, the first thing I heard about you at work was that when you enter a room, the energy changes. Not because you demand attention, but because people listen. I glanced at him. And do you believe that? He nodded. I'm living it. I straightened my posture. The gift, my voice, and my truth still mine to offer. Let's begin then, I said, and we stepped into the fire. As we stepped through the side entrance, the air inside hit me like a wave. Polished wood floors reflected the soft amber glow of hanging lights. The lake shimmered behind massive windows. The hum of conversation and laughter faded as the doors closed behind us. People turned. Some recognized me, instantly surprised, etching their faces. Others squinted confused. A few, mostly those from Sophie's curated circle, already wore narrowed eyes and stiff jaws. I didn't flinch. Daniel stood a step ahead, cleared his throat, and said loudly, clearly, "Everyone, may I have your attention? I'd like to introduce someone very important, Eleanor Carter, daughter of Patricia, and my boss at Vertex Technologies." The room fell silent. All at once, heads swiveled, mouths parted, glasses froze midair. In the middle of the room, my mother stood abruptly. Her lavender dress shimmered under the light's eyes wide with something close to shock. "Eleanor." I walked toward her, my steps slow but deliberate. When I reached her, she opened her arms without hesitation and pulled me into an embrace. "You came," she whispered. "Of course I did, Mom. I told you I would." "But Sophie said," I pulled back gently but firmly, "we need to talk. All of us. Now." Before she could respond, Dad appeared, his face darkening with every step. Sophie trailed behind him, cheeks burning crimson, lips tightly pressed. "What is this?" my father growled. "You were told." "I was lied about," I interrupted. "That's what this is." Gasps, murmurs. I turned to my mother. Did you know I was turned away at the door, that Dad told me I wasn't on the list? She looked from me to my father, then to Sophie. Is that true, Richard? He hesitated. We discussed what happened at Thanksgiving. It was best. We didn't discuss excluding her. Mum snapped, her voice sharper than I'd heard in years. You said she didn't want to come. I never said that, I said clearly. In fact, when we spoke, I told you I'd be here. Sophie's arms folded. You misunderstood. No, Sophie, I said, turning toward her. You misunderstood what silence gives you permission to do. For too long, I let her control the story. Not anymore. You told everyone I declined. You told Mum I was too busy. You told Dad I was selfish. You planned my humiliation. She laughed brittle. You're always so dramatic. Tell them, I said, looking at Daniel. He stepped forward. I overheard them last night. Richard and Sophie talked about what to do if Elena came. Sophie said it'd be better if she didn't. More gasps. Aunt Regina put down her glass. Uncle Simon shifted uncomfortably. This is ridiculous, Sophie barked. You don't understand what it's like being the one who stays, the one who handles everything. You think I don't carry anything? I asked. I've carried the silence, the absence, the guilt. But I never threw you under the bus. Her voice cracked. You got to leave, Eleanor. You got to become someone. I was just the one left behind to keep things together. You were chosen. I was left. Her voice trembled, not with rage, but grief. A different kind of truth hiding behind the lie. Mum stepped forward, placing a hand on each of our shoulders. This isn't the place, she said gently, but it is the moment. We need to talk. All of us. She turned to the crowd. I apologize, everyone. Please continue enjoying yourselves. My family needs a moment of privacy. The room shifted uneasily, but her tone left no room for discussion. She guided us, me dad, Sophie, Daniel, into a side lounge. Behind us, I could feel every eye follow. We sat. I could feel my pulse in my throat. Mum looked at Dad. Did you know she was coming? He avoided her eyes. I thought it'd be easier if she didn't. Easier for who? Mum's voice rose. You turned away our daughter. On my birthday. Sophie crossed her arms tighter. She wanted the drama. She always does. No, I said softly. I wanted the truth. And you kept it from everyone. Daniel added, Sophie's been feeding selective information. She painted Eleanor as indifferent, even hostile. Because that's how it felt, Sophie cried. She got a life. I got responsibility. That doesn't give you the right to lie, Mum said, to manipulate. Sophie looked down. Her fingers trembled. For the first time, I saw her not as my enemy, but as a girl who never got to choose. I took a breath. We've all been playing roles for so long, we forgot who we are underneath. Then, let's find out, Mum said, but not with half-truths, not with secrets. She looked at each of us. We start again. Family meeting tomorrow. No filters, just truth. And for the first time in years, I nodded. I'll be there. The room was small and windowless, the kind usually reserved for bridal prep or emergencies. But tonight, it became a battlefield for 4 wounded hearts. Mum closed the door quietly behind us, her back straighter than I'd seen in years. The music and chatter outside faded into a distant hum. The room felt like a confessional. Dad stood with his arms crossed, defensive. Sophie chose the farthest chair, a tight coil of fury and fragility. I remained standing, too wired to sit. I think we all deserve some truth, Mum said, breaking the silence. I looked straight at my father. Did you really mean what you said? That I wasn't on the list because I don't make time for family? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he exhaled slowly, like a man caught between duty and denial. I thought I was protecting your mother, After Thanksgiving, the way you spoke. The way I spoke, I echoed, incredulous. What about the things Sophie said to me? The accusations, the character assassination. Sophie flinched but said nothing. Mum stepped forward. Her voice trembled, but her gaze held steady. That night changed something. I saw both of you hurting. I should have done more. But the truth is... She hesitated. Go on, I urged gently. I've been struggling with the memory issues. She admitted. Mild cognitive impairment. The doctors say it's early and manageable. But Sophie has been helping me. A lot. With meds, appointments, errands. I leaned on her too much. I felt the ground shift. It made sense now, the silence, the missed calls, the gentle confusion in her voice. But why keep it from me? Why didn't you tell me? I asked, the hurt bleeding through. Mum looked at Sophie, then at me. Because Sophie said it might stress you. With your job and the distance. I turned to Sophie. You decided that for me... Sophie's jaw clenched, but her eyes welled up. I was trying to keep things from falling apart. I've been the one here every day. Cleaning up messes, driving to appointments, reminding her to eat, to take her pills. And you thought cutting me out was helping, I asked. I thought it would hurt less if you were already gone, she said, her voice breaking. You got to leave, Eleanor. You got to become someone. I stayed because someone had to. And all I ever hear is how amazing you are, the daughter who made it. The bitterness in her voice was sharp, but beneath it, I recognized something more ancient, a longing to be seen. Sophie, I said softly, you're not invisible. Not to me, not to Mom. You've carried so much, and I never said thank you. But why couldn't I be part of it too? Why couldn't we do this together? Sophie wiped her tears roughly. Because you shine too bright, Eleanor. Around you, I disappear. My throat tightened. I knelt beside her chair, levelling our eyes. You don't have to disappear. You don't have to be me. You just have to be you. And that's enough. It always was. She shook her head. You don't get it. I spent my whole life trying to be good enough. And when Mum smiled at your third-place science fair ribbon, something cracked in me. That old ribbon, a relic of innocence. I had no idea it meant so much or so little to someone else. Dad cleared his throat. Maybe. We all misjudged some things. I wanted both of you to follow a certain path. I didn't know I was pushing you apart. We don't need blame right now, Mum said. We need to start again. I nodded. But it starts with honesty. No more filters, no more gatekeepers. We talk to each other, not about each other. Mum squeezed both our hands. I want my daughters back, both of you, not as I imagined you to be, but as you are. Sophie nodded, hesitant but sincere. Dad offered a quiet, solemn apology that meant more than any speech. It wasn't a resolution. It wasn't closure. But it was something rawer, more real, a beginning. 3 weeks after the birthday party, my mother stepped off a JetBlue flight at Logan International Airport. I spotted her before she saw me walking slowly, but deliberately, her coat too big, clutching the handbag she'd owned for 2 decades. There was a quiet dignity in her, and a flicker of something I hadn't seen in a long time initiative. Mom, I called out. She turned, her eyes widening, and then softened into a warm, unguarded smile. Eleanor, she breathed. You look so grown. I've been grown for a while, Mum, I said, gently hugging her. We spent the next 3 days together, not as mother and daughter trapped in old dynamics, but as 2 women slowly relearning each other. I showed her my office sleek glass, fast elevators, a corner desk flooded with light. She touched the photos on my bookshelf, my college graduation, the charity gala I helped organise, and a framed thank you note from my team. They respect you, she said simply, watching a young engineer nod to me in the hallway. And I respect them. We walked along the Charles River that evening. She wore the scarf I'd bought her last Christmas, the one she never acknowledged receiving. You know, she said for years, I didn't understand your world. It scared me how different it was. But being here, I see how much of yourself you've put into this life. I looked at her. You think I abandoned you, but I wasn't running from the family. I was running towards something that didn't ask me to be less. She didn't deny it, but she reached for my hand and held it. Daniel transferred to another department the Monday after the party, formally removing me from his reporting chain. I didn't ask him to. He made the choice himself. It's cleaner this way, he said. But just so you know, I'm still on your side. We still got coffee sometimes, and when we talked, it wasn't about Brooke. It was about leadership, boundaries, ethics. He was one of the few people who'd seen both sides of my life and chose to believe me anyway. A handwritten letter arrived from Sophie 2 weeks later. I recognised the slant of her cursive immediately. I'm in therapy. I'm learning that silence can be just as damaging as lies. I spent so long trying to be what everyone needed that I forgot to be myself. I don't know if I deserve forgiveness yet, but I'm learning to give it to you and to myself. I sat with that letter for an hour, read it 3 times, cried on the third. Sometimes healing doesn't come through confrontation. Sometimes it comes through surrender. For Thanksgiving that year, I hosted dinner in my apartment overlooking the river. It was the first time in a decade we didn't gather in that suburban house with its stained carpets and unspoken rules. Mum came early and helped me cook. Tyler flew in from Colorado with his new girlfriend. Even Dad showed up awkwardly, holding a bottle of wine and a store-bought pie. Sophie didn't come, but she sent a package, a book on forgiveness, a candle labelled reconciliation, and a note. Hope dinner goes well, maybe next year. It wasn't much, but it was something. That evening, as we sat around the table, the candles flickering low and the turkey half gone, Mum raised her glass. I want to say something, she said, her voice steady. The room quieted. I want to thank Elena, not just for hosting, but for being brave enough to tell the truth even when it hurt. That was the gift I didn't know I needed. My father nodded, swallowing hard. She's right. I judged too quickly. And I'm sorry. He looked directly at me. I'm proud of you. Not for the job, but for who you've become. I couldn't speak, just held my glass higher. That night, after everyone left, I stood by the window and looked out over Boston. My city, my life. For so long, I'd lived in 2 worlds, the woman I was at work and the girl I reverted to in front of my family. But now, for the first time, those 2 selves felt like one. In the end, healing didn't mean erasing the past. It meant acknowledging the scars. It meant choosing honesty over comfort. It meant realizing that family isn't defined by blood alone, but by the willingness to grow to own our roles in each other's pain and to keep showing up anyway. I poured a final glass of wine and opened my journal. Family is not a fixed location. It is a journey we walk toward each other, one hard truth at a time. I wrote those words slowly. Then I closed the book and let the silence fill the room, not as an absence, but as space for something new.